Today in the house we have none other than Mark Proctor, all the way from UK, England. I've met Mark twice, once in London and the other time was very recently in Bulgaria. I've seen his work. He is an absolute ninja when it comes to Excel and on Power Query. Now here is a quick story. While we were sitting in the audience, Mark and I were sitting together and I whispered in Mark's ear, "Hey Mark, you want to do a Power Query tricks battle on my YouTube channel?" Mark agreed to that, and this is that episode of the Power Query tricks battle. What we're going to do is we're going to share one trick after the other, throw the tricks at you for you to take a look at the trick, and you're going to score us if you liked our trick. You'll have one trick from me and one trick from Mark. If you like my trick, you will give me a point. If you like Mark's trick, you can give also Mark a point. In total, we have 7 tricks each. That means 14 tricks for you to take a look at. If we each get a score of 7 for me and 7 for Mark, it's an absolute draw. Nobody wins the game. But in case you find my tricks better, you can give me a higher score. In case you find Mark's tricks better, you can give obviously Mark a higher score. Your comments throughout the video is going to be absolutely crucial. By the end of this video, you can leave a comment stating my final score and Mark's final score, whatever that might be. After releasing the video, in the first 10 days, we're going to accumulate all the scores that we have received and then find out that who is the ultimate winner. And that's been it. Mark is here in the house. Let the battle begin. All right, look who's in the house today. Mark Proctor, all the way from England. How's it going, Mark?
I'm good, thanks, Chandeep. It's great to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. We met twice over in London. Actually, once in London, the other one in Bulgaria. Every time I've spoken to you, either I have shared a nice joke, we have been caught in cameras while giggling or laughing in the audiences in the front row, or I have received a really nice trick on Power Query or to do something in Excel. And so I thought this time, when I was interacting with you in Bulgaria, I thought, why don't I call you over to the YouTube channel here and we'll trade tricks. So one trick for me, one trick for you. And this is going to be like a contest, Mark. So if people like your trick...
It's going to be tough. I mean, beating the king of M code is going to be tough, isn't it?
Well, I'm pretty sure you're going to win, but let's see. Let's see. So yeah, we'll be trading tricks. So if your trick is nice, you get 1 point. If my trick is nice, I get 1 point. We don't have to compare our tricks. If people like your trick, they'll give a point to you. And if people like my trick, they'll give a point to me. And you have 7 tricks in your kitty, and I have 7 tricks in my kitty. And after a week or so, we will compare all the comments that people throw up in the comments, like all the scores that people throw up in the comments. We'll add the scores and we'll put that out as a pinned comment. Sounds good to you?
I mean, in all honesty, Chandeep, I've got 9 tricks. Because depending on what you pull out, right, I need to up my game or lower my game. This is as much about strategy as it is about anything else.
Didn't I tell you that you're gonna win? I mean, you started off with a lead of 9 tricks, and I came with 7. Cool.
Well,
Mark.
you know, I've got to play dirty any way I can.
All right, Mark. Before we begin, do you want to maybe quickly introduce yourself for the 2 people in the world who don't know you?
Yeah, so my name is Mark Proctor. I run Excel off the grid. So we primarily try and help end users automate their work in Excel. So accountants, engineers, anyone who deals with data, and hopefully we can get no one has to work late anymore. If you follow Excel off the grid, join our membership. That's the kind of thing. That's what we're about. That's what we really want to do. Just help people to save time, spend more time doing what they love, spend more time with their kids, and less time at work.
Absolutely. And you might want to give a shout out to your YouTube channel. I've seen that you're doing pretty good on YouTube as well. I mean, you have some very nice, solid videos. I follow you all the time. So what's that channel?
It'll just be youtube.com or whatever it is at Excel off the grid, and that will get you there.
Excellent. Excellent. That's the promotion. You want to start, Mark, with a real battle?
Let's go. So my first tip is my favorite tip in the whole of Power Query. It's the best way just to update your files and work through various things. So what I've got here is I've got a date, I've got a file path, and then I've got the query that we'll be updating. And what we want is a dynamic file path so that when we change the date updates the file path, and then the file path then determines what query we then refresh. Cool. So for this, I'm going to create a couple of named ranges. Got the first one called date, because it's a date, it's not just a clever name. Then I've got one called file path. And now, because this is text, because my file path here is text, I can concatenate these various items. So I've got a year of 2022, and then I can use the year from my date. So that's in there. And then I've got my date as well at the top, which for that I can use a text function. So that's the text of my date. And then this was in a year, day, no, year, month, day format. Close that, press return. Hopefully that should work. So I've now got a file path. Now if I go to data and then add this as a separate query, so from table/range, so this is a named range. Okay, so Power Query has finally opened up, still churning away, but it's now connected to my file path named range. Let's go to my file path named range. So that's the value that we want. Now, if I could remember the syntax, I could have gone straight in with the syntax, but I never remember the syntax. So I'm going to right click on this and then go to drill down. Okay, so that's created another step, which has then got my full file path. What we need to do now is to concatenate this into a single step. So I'm going to take my source 0 and then column 1. I'm going to put that on the end of my source step just so I get that into a single step. And then I'm going to copy all of that, come back to my query that contains my original source data.
Right.
View, advanced editor. And now at the top of the advanced editor, rather than source, start a new line. I'll call it file path. I'll paste the code I previously copied. And then, rather than my full file path, I can then reference to file path, which is the previous step. So that's that step name up there. I'll click done. And am I currently in it? Couldn't find it. That's disappointing. Right, let's go find it. So when I find out that I got the date wrong at the start, so I'm going to copy that as path, come back to my Excel workbook. Let's close and load on this. Oh, I know what I've done, Chandeep. Here we go. Yeah. Can't find it because the latest date of my data is 2022.
Okay.
Rather than 2023. So now if we go 2022, this should work. Refresh all. I've never. So if I change this to January, got an error on maybe one of my other queries in here. 31/01 2023. So have a look. So they're my values. Let's refresh. So if we look at those values, got an error somewhere else.
Yeah.
There you go. My data updates.
Nice.
So cool. Even though I'm getting that error, that is still working through. Let me just delete this file path because we don't need that. Delete. Let me go into delete my file path query. I don't need that anymore. So that might have been, that would have been my original issue. Okay, so now I've sorted all of that out. This should now work. If we go back to the 31st of the 12th, 2022, refresh all. Fantastic, nice. Look at that, it now works. So the lesson there is, don't make up dates that don't exist in your data set. But we're now connected to a date then determines what we need to use as our file path. That then updates our output into Excel as a table. Excellent. So that's my first tip. Over to you.
Excellent. It's a blank screen. There's nothing inside of it, but I'm going to connect to one Excel file. And the trick that I want to talk about is that how not to have the promoted header step, especially when you're connecting to an Excel file. So let's just see. So I'm going to go over to this Excel file that I have. So I have a folder open. Where is that folder? Here is the folder. Here is a data file that I have. There are two sheets in that, sheet 1 and sheet 2. And I want to connect to the file on sheet number 1. And that's not even a table, that's just a data. And I want to connect to this. Let's just open up Excel. And I'm going to say data, get data from file, from an Excel workbook. And I'm going to navigate to the folder. Okay, that's my data, sheet number 1. Import. That establishes the connection. That's my sheet number 1 data. I click on transform data and the data is there inside of Power Query. I'll just bring Power Query to this particular screen. Now, if you take a look, this went to that Excel file, which is that data Excel file that we spoke about a while ago. Then it navigated to sheet number 1, which is this particular sheet. That's the navigation. And after that, when Power Query is reading the data of Excel files, it does not automatically promote the headers. And headers are typically in the first row of the data, which you would then find to be promoted using the promoted header step almost always. That's the promoted header step. And therefore, after that, you would have a change type or whatever. Now, the trick is that this particular function, which is excel.workbook, has got a hidden parameter. It's not even a hidden. It's like people don't know about it, which is this second last input, which is null. Now, if you just happen to change that to, let's say, a true, this true simply means that please consider every single sheet and the first row of every single sheet to be the headers of that row. So here, at the moment, if you just take a look at the null value here, so if I just write that null, you're going to see that in sheet number 1, the header is in the first row of the data. So if I happen to change that to a true, it will consider the first row of every single sheet to be the headers, and I can just then delete the promoted header step. So I can just come in here, happen to change that to a true, and if I just preview the table once again, you can see that this is a header. That's nice. I can navigate. There are headers now in the data, and I can just get rid of the promoted header step, and then the change type is just going to work just okay. So that's just like a little trick to reduce one step of the query. Nothing that significant, but I'm sure if you find it interesting. Over to you.
So in my second tip, what I've got is I've connected to a folder. I've then clicked on the combine files icon, which then creates the helper queries, and we have the transform sample file, and that then comes through. So that then gets iterated for each file in that folder. And then when we come back to the example 2, all of those are then placed on the end of each other. The issue comes is that because I've got these reports, all the reports, there's no date on them, okay? So this date can exist in 2 places. So either we can use a date that comes from our file path, so we can purposefully use file naming conventions to make sure we get the correct name, or we can pull out the name or the date that comes from our original report. So if I go through the transform sample file, so we start off with our source, then it goes into my navigation step, and this is just like the first file in our folder. This is what it looks like originally. You can see we have a date up here.
Damn, it's
this
stuck
is
in
the
the
date
first
we
row.
want to get.
It's stuck in the first few rows.
Yep, it's right there. But we need this date to know at what time period each of our data relates to. We then removed our top rows. We then promoted our headers. We then changed type. We then filtered the rows to remove a null, I think. But so how do we add the date? Well, we know that from our navigation step, that at that point, in column 1 and row 3, we have something that contains the date. Now, one problem is that the navigation step is not called the navigation step. So to find out what that step name is, we can either go to the next step down, and we can find out it's called TB sheet, or if you go to the advanced editor, you'll also see that you get your source step, and then after that, we get our step after that, which is called TB sheet. So that's the name that is the real name of our navigation step. So when we come to the end, then we go add column, custom column. Here we go. I'm going to call this date.
Fair.
And then the table name at that time was called TB underscore sheet. And then we want column 1, and then we want, there's the third row. So that is, because Power Query is 0 based, it's actually row 2. So I'll close that curly bracket. I'll click OK. That will now go off and give me the date for every single one of my reports.
That's beautiful.
I should have connected to a smaller folder. I connected to a folder with loads and loads of files. But when this comes through, what we'll see is that you can then split your date, because our original date was as at the 31st of December. So we split that. So we remove as at from the start. That then just gives us our date.
That's cool. Yeah. I think not just for combining data through multiple Excel files, but even though just like perhaps if you have some information stuck in the first few rows of the table, you can use this technique to just pull it out as a column. That's brilliant.
Yeah,
I like it.
Anytime you've got something at the top that you want to pull down, so hopefully we can then go transform, we'll extract the text after the delimiter, and my delimiter will be as at or as space at space. So that will then just get me my date, which will change to a date data type. And then when that pulls through into my final query, I'll click that in a moment.
Oh, that's nice. I like it. I really like it.
So there we go. We now have a date column. And as we scroll down, you can see there's December,
beautiful,
and then January, February. So that is a way that we can get the date or any value from the top of a report. I mean, it's particularly useful when you're combining files in a folder, because each of those files, otherwise, without that, we wouldn't really know which date related to which. So that's my second tip.
Absolutely. That was fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I like the way that you referenced the table, and then you referenced the column, and then the row number that contains the data point, and that you added as a column. That was brilliant. Now, my trick has to do with creating multiple columns in just one go. So obviously the process of creating a column is that you go like this, and this could be an enhancement of your trick as well. So at the moment, if in your trick you had to extract, let's say, 3 values from the top 3 rows, and all the 3 values were important to you, then you would have done add column and custom column 3 times over.
Well, I might have done, unless I knew the trick that you're about to show me.
That's right. So what you can do is you can probably do something interesting by creating a record. So what is a record? I'll just quickly maybe do a record here. So other sources, a blank query, and I'll do a record. So what is a record? A record is nothing but one row of data. But the way that you create a record is in the curly brackets, sorry, in the square brackets. And the record always has got 2 parts. So the first part of the record is the name of the column. So column name is name. And the value of the column, oops, I'll just do it again. So yeah, square brackets, that's how you initiate a record. I'm going to write a name. And for the name of the column, you don't even need to write that in the inverted commas, quotation marks, nothing. Just write the name of the column straight. And let's just say that my name is Chandeep. Not let's just say, my name is actually Chandeep. And age, I just turned 38. All right. Now, you're going to see that although it looks vertical like this, but this is actually the row of the table. And the row of the table contains 2 columns, name and age, and the value of the columns is Chandeep and 38. Fair enough. Now, this is a record, and we can use records to create multiple columns in a table and expand them in one go. So let's just say that in this particular table that I have, I would like to create 3 columns. So one column could be cost column, so which is sales minus profit will give me cost. That's column number 1. Then I can create profit percentage, which is profit divided by sales is going to give me a profit percentage. Maybe I can give a commission, which is 10% of the profit value. So that's commission. How do I create all the 3 columns in just one go using a record? So I'm going to go over to the Add Columns tab and click on the Custom column. In the Custom column, I will do the same thing that I just did, which is creating a record in the square brackets. And then I'm going to create the first column of the data, which is nothing but my cost. Cost, the formula for that is sales minus profit. That's my first column value. Put in a comma, and then I will create the second column. And what happened? I will create the second column, and the second column is nothing but, what was that? Profit percent. And that is going to be profit divided by my sales. And the third column is going to be, let's say, the commission. And the commission is going to be, let's say, 10%. So 0.1 multiplied by the profit value, right? So that is that. Now we have done 3 columns at the moment. I'm going to click on OK. And what you get is nothing but a record. If you peek into the record, you will have all the 3 items calculated. And all that you're left to do now, this could have been 3 or, I don't know, 5 columns. And you can just expand them. So just click on expand, cost, profit percentage, commission, click on OK. And those are your 3 columns added in just one shot.
Very nice, very nice.
Cool, over to you.
Okay, so my third example includes this data set here, where we have nested rows or nested header rows. So we've got our actual, and then there's 2023 and 2022, and then the quarter numbers. And then we've got budget 2023, 2024. So we've got multiple header rows here. So when we connect to this in Power Query, let me close this workbook. Actually, before we I'm not particularly good at remembering syntax or steps, so I'm not even going to tackle this in the way that you think. Instead, I'm going to come to my custom functions library.
Okay.
Here's my custom functions library. I've got about 41 functions in there at the moment, which does most of my Power Query stuff for me. I'm going to search for flatten.
That's awesome.
And then it's going to be flatten header rows. I'm going to insert that into Power Query. There it is, FX flatten header rows. I'll then come back to my query, example 3. And now I've got this data in Power Query. You can see I've got, this is the format here.
Yep.
I'm not going to worry about the steps. I'm just going to click on FX to add a new step. My query is FX flatten header rows. So my table is called datasheet. Then I want header row count. I've got 3 headers. What separator do I want to use? That's the next argument. In double quotes, I'll use a pipe symbol.
Yeah.
And what fill direction do I want? Well, as you can see, I've got actual there, and I want it to fill to the right. So I'll fill that right. If it was left, I could fill it left. If If I wanted null, I could fill it as nothing. And then when I commit that, fantastic, it does it straight away. We then unpivot that, split the columns. Jobs are good. And I've then got everything in a flattened file format. So flatten header rows is one of my 41 custom functions that I just pull in whenever I need to use them.
This is amazing. Now, more than the function itself, what I want to do is that how can people have the tool where you save the functions?
So the tool itself is an Excel add-in. Anyone who's a member of my academy gets this as part of the membership. They get it as an Excel add-in. They get it as a text file. They get an Excel workbook. The next version that's coming out shortly will also have it embedded already into Power BI, so you can copy and paste and move them around. So yeah, anyone who is a member of my academy gets this automatically with all of those functions ready to go. There's help pages and example workbooks, so you can work through those. So yeah, that's flatten header rows.
My God, that was amazing. That was amazing, because I have seen so many people struggling with this kind of data where you have like a bunch of headers and then you might have to fill right or left or howsoever that might be. And this is absolutely like a game changer. All right, cool. Although the next trick that I have, you can obviously make a custom function for that, but it's pretty cool. It's easy and it's cool. It's really cool. So that's the third query that I've created right here. And again, some same sample data, nothing that complicated. The only additional thing that I have done in this particular query is that from the date column right here on the far right, I have created the year column from the dates. That's all that I have done. Now, sometimes you would want to, I mean, those are not even sometimes, those are very rare times when you would want to add like a totals row in Power Query. You can do that with Power Pivot, you can do that with DAX or something, but I've seen people who would use Power Query to upload the data on their legacy systems and they would want to have a totals row at the bottom for some reason. But guess what? You can do that with grouping. So take a look. I'm going to start to do the grouping because I just want to shorten the data first and then I want to show the technique. So I'm just going to go over to the Transform tab and click on the group. And that's where I'm going to say that, hey, I would like to have 2 levels of grouping. Let's just say only 1 level of grouping. Year, I'm going to say that this is going to be my total sales. And I'm going to say, hey, please sum the sales column. Right here, click on OK. And for the 4 years of data that I have, I've got 4 numbers right here. Now, I did this particular step in order to just shorten my data. There is no need of doing this if you still want to follow the trick. Now, what I can do is I can write the table.group function manually and I can create a totals row. Take a look. So I'm going to create a new step. And I'm going to call this as totals. And I'm going to start to write the table.group function. So I'll say table.group. Now, table.group, the first part is nothing but a table. Which table are you trying to work with? I'm trying to work with the table which is in the previous step. That's my table. So I'm just going to reference hash group rows. That's my table. And then it says, hey, what's your key? Key is nothing but the condition. So if you just go back and take a look at the group rows right here, our key or the parameter or the condition through which we did a sum if was nothing but the year. And that's the year right here. Now, in case I want to take a total of all of the 4 values here, I do not have a key. So I do not want to provide the year key. So I'm just going to maybe leave the key as empty, which is the empty list. And then I'm going to maybe start to do list.sum, which is nothing but list.sum of this particular total sales column. Simple as that. So I will say that I want to create a column and the column name is got to be the same. So the column name is got to be the same column as we have it here, which is nothing but total sales. So I will just come right here and I'll say, hey, the column name is going to be total sales and each value is going to be list.sum, and that is going to be, I believe, for the total sales column. Let's just see if that works. All right. Now what we have done is we have taken these 4 rows of data and we have summed it up in the next step right here. Now, if you take a look at both these steps, the only thing which is common right here is the header. So this header and this particular header is exactly the same, and that's a mandate. Now, all that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, hey, why don't you combine this table and this table? These are 2 tables that I have. So I'll say, hey, why don't you just combine the group rows table? Okay, I'll just write that again. Hash group rows and the totals that I have created. Now, once you combine that, you're going to have the total at the bottom that you were seeking to have. Now, at the moment, people would want to have the word total here as well. Like I would want to see the word total. And what I can do is I can go back to the previous step. At the moment, this particular table contains just one column. I can have it contain two columns as well. So I can come in here and say something like, hey, this is column number 1. That is good. But I would want you to create another column. So for that, I need a list of a list structure. So I need one list for total sales column and another list for the text as total. So I'm going to say something like this, put another comma, have another list, have another list. And in that list, the first part is going to be the name of the column. So that's going to be the year. Then I'm going to say in every single row, I just want to put in the text, which is nothing but total. That's about it. Close the list outside, close the bracket, press on OK, and that is the year. And that's it. Now, if you just, now, although year seems to be here, that doesn't seem, valid. But once the data has been combined, because the year column is exactly the same here as well, I think that is just going to fall in the right place automatically. So that's
nice, very nice. That's like 3 tips in one. That's cheating in terms of in terms of our game, Chandeep.
Well, you got the.
But yeah, I like the.
You got 9 tricks to begin with.
The use of the ampersand to concatenate things is nice.
Yeah,
I like it.
You got 9 tricks to begin with, so I can cheat a little, I guess. All right, over to you, Mark.
Okay, so for tip 4, what we've got is I've connected to an Excel workbook, and as we look across here, you can see that it's got a lot of columns that we don't necessarily need. It's got a lot of null columns.
Mm-hmm.
Now, nobody wants null columns. They're, somebody somewhere in some IT system has created this to look good on Excel sheet somehow, but they've included these null columns, and that's definitely not what we want.
Sure.
So what we want to do is to remove all of those null columns, but we don't necessarily know which columns. We might not know which columns are null.
Right.
So there might be a column 13 or column 14 that might come in that contains a null value. So how can we remove all of those null columns? That's the question. So we are going to write a few bits of M code here.
Okay.
And in case you're wondering, I do have a custom function that does this, but let's go through step by step. So we're going to use table.profile. So that's the function that we're going to use. So this is going to give me some statistics about my table. Mm-hmm. It tells me that I have how many columns have a null count. Now there is a bug with this somewhere that I don't know if it'll come through now. If I say I want just the items where it says 5, it tells me that the field non-null or null count wasn't found, which is strange because obviously it's right there, right? Yeah. But there we go. Let's not worry about that. Let's insert another step. I don't know why that happens. Maybe you can hijack the tip if you know. We're going to remove the other columns, so we just get 2. And somehow by doing this, we can now filter. So I just want the 5 columns. I'll click OK. So this tells me all the columns. Now I've got 5 because there's only 5 records in my data. If you've got 1,000, it'll say 1,000. The point is this is the biggest number. Mm-hmm. So rather than equal 5, what we want it to equal is the table.row count. Got 2 dots in there. And I want the table.row count of my promoted header step. If I've closed the brackets correctly, I have. So that now gives me the list of all the columns that contain only null values.
Right.
If I then drill down into this, so if I go drill, I don't have to drill, but let's do it anyway. That then creates a list. So there's my list of column names that are null.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So then if I add another step, I can then get to my promoted header step was the last step, wasn't it? So let's type equals promoted headers. Let's get that back. And now if I want to remove any columns, let's just remove 2, just as an example. So it gives me a list there, column 1, column 2, and column 3. If I replace that with the list that I created before, which here is called column, my applied steps. I mean, hopefully, if I was doing this properly, I would name my steps properly rather than having custom 1 and custom 2. That's not going to work because I've got a curly bracket there. But there we go. I've now cleaned up my data set. All those null columns, all those blank columns have now disappeared. So I've now got a clean data set that I can use. If we get new null columns in my data set, it doesn't cause me any problems.
Excellent.
So there we go. That's my tip.
Excellent. All right, so the next trick is a pretty cool equation keyword. So generally speaking, there are times in Power Query when you want to check if the value is a number, when the value is a text, when the something or the other. And I don't know how you do it, but then I think I learned it somewhere in taking a look at somebody's M code, but then there is a keyword called the is keyword, is. So I can just say that here in this particular column, everything is nothing but a number, but I want to see if there is a text in there or not. So I can just reference the year column and I can say is number, that's it. So this is going to give me a boolean, which is a true and false output. I'm going to get a true here. I'm going to get a true, a true, a true, and then here is where I'm going to get a false. So click on OK, and you get your bunches and trues and falses. That's one. Now it obviously works with numbers and texts and dates and things like that. But hey, it also works with structured values. That means that you can do something like this. So I can just create a new step in right here. Now, added custom happens to be a table in the previous step, which is right here. And I can say, is added custom, is that a list? Now, obviously, that is not a list. Now, I'm going to get a false in here. And you can also compare within the structured values and primitive values, and then use that true and false to do anything further. So if I say, hey, if that is a table, that is absolutely a true. So that was my little tip right there.
Let me share my screen and we'll have a look at the next tip. So what we've got here in this example is a reasonably commonish scenario where you get some data out of a system, and for whatever reason, the period that you've chosen or the date that you've got happens to be inside your column name, which is a problem, as we know, because when you get to, and this is April 2024, when you get to May, June, July, any other month, it's going to break, especially when we use our change type step.
Absolutely.
You'll see that April 2024 is then hard coded into our M code.
I agree.
So before we do any change type step, before we do anything that's going to hard code a value, what we want to do is to change our column name. And one way we can do that is by changing that column name by position.
Okay.
So I'm going to rename this column and I'm just going to call it value. So now I've got April 2024 is hard coded, but what we're going to do is use the table.columnnames function, table.columnnames. I'll open the bracket on that. It asks me what my table is. Well, my table is source, because that is the name of my previous step. So that gives me a list of my column names. Right. So I've now got item, region, size, and April 2024. But I just want one item from that list. So in curly brackets, and again, Power Query 0 based, so column 0, column 1, column 2, and column 3.
I think that's going to be...
I need to put that curly bracket outside of my bracket, or else that won't work. And now when we commit that, it's now called value. So it was called April 2024. It's now called value. We haven't hard-coded the name of our column anywhere. So when we change those data types, it won't cause us an error for the next month. And then months after that, it will just flow through correctly without any issues from our column names.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. The trick that I'm going to talk about will make a complete sense when I talk about the next trick, but I'll anyways go for it. So generally speaking, when people have to remove the columns, so you would say that, hey, I want to select the sales rep column and the customer column. These are the two columns that I want to select. I can right click on that and I can say remove other columns. That's what generally people do. And obviously the sales rep and the customer is hard coded. That's one way of doing things. Another way of doing the same thing, which is also where your column names are going to be hard coded, is through projections. It's not different, it's just another way of doing it. So I'm going to remove this particular step right here, and I'm going to start to write a new step. And this is also remove other columns, but a different way of doing it. So what you do is you write the table name first. So that's my table, which is nothing but the previous step. And then you create a record. And within a record, you create a column name. So the first column that I want in the nested record is, let's say, customer. So I'll just write customer. And the second column that I want is again going to be in the square brackets, which is called sales rep. So now I've created a projection. So it's like a record outside with two small square brackets inside. All this means is that from this particular table, I would want to keep two columns, sales rep and the customer, and this actually gives you columns. Now, it is very, very trivial. People would not know, okay, how do I use it? I could obviously use table.remove columns, but I have seen people doing this a lot of times. So let's just say that you would want to take the sales column out of this table and you want to drill down on it. So people are going to go right click and they want to say drill down. They convert it into a list, right? That's fair. And then, because this is a list and your user interface is like dead now because Power Query's user interface cannot work with lists, so you might want to convert it back into a table. So you kind of click on table and this converts back into a list. However, you could have used the projections techniques in the first place if you just wanted to pull out one column. So I'm going to say, hey, remove columns, obviously. I want to have the sales column, but the sales column should come in at as a table in the first place. So I'm going to say, hey, square bracket outside, square bracket to surround that, and just one column inside of that. And the sales column that you get is nothing but a table in the first place, and you can just work with the table. That is nothing but projections.
That's a nice tip. You know, earlier when you did the example of creating multiple, when you did your add columns in multiple columns, that's where I thought you were going in that example, but you've pulled it out here.
Okay.
So, you know, that is I mean, let's face it, that is a pretty nice tip. Whether you can't deny it, that's useful.
Thank you. Okay, over to you.
Okay, so here we've got an example where, because people often say, I've been asked a number of times, how can I filter by a list in Power Query? Okay, it's a common question. It comes up quite a lot. So we're first going to look at how do you filter by a list, and then I'm going to say there's a much faster way.
Okay.
And we're going to find out how we do it the slow way, but then how can we do it the faster way?
Okay.
So I've got another table here, contains my list, just 2 items, Alpha and Charlie. So my table is called EX6 list. My column is called filter list. So in my item column, I'm just going to filter normally. So let's check 2 items. Let's go Bravo and Charlie. So that creates a step called select rows. Now the truth is that anything after the each column, it really just wants the value true or false.
Sure.
So if I just type the word true, if I type the word true correctly without any typos, there we go. That will give me all the rows.
Sure.
And if I have the word false, it gives me none of the rows.
Okay.
So really it's just whether for each item we have the word true or false. So what we want is that if we use something like list.contains, it gives us a true or false value. So list.contains, now I'll open the bracket on that. So list.contains, we want our table. So we want our example 6 list.
Okay.
So we're checking our list, and my column was called filter list. So that gives me a list, and I want to check whether my value, and my value is in my item column, which we can no longer see. So now that will give us just the items that are in that list. Now, this list comes from a table in Excel.
Yeah.
And if we wanted to, we could update that table and click refresh, and it would pull more items through. And it would pull out the relevant items from our list. Now, the truth is there's a much faster way of doing this exact match from a list, because often even I, so I use this method for a long time. I overlooked the simplest way to filter based on a list. I'm going to delete that step, and instead I'm going to select my step, go to merge queries. So then I get my example 6 data. I'm going to pull up my list, I want my filter list and my item. And if I use a right outer, so that means it will return only the items which are in my second list. I click OK. It's going to add an additional column, but which just contains the items which match that list. I don't need that list. I'll press delete, and now that's gone. So I've achieved the same thing without writing any M code.
That's right.
And actually, I'm doing tests. So over 100,000 rows, if you're just matching 2 items, list.contains will take around 18 seconds, or it did for me. But if we use the merge method, it took 1.6 seconds.
Damn.
So the speed difference on using merge compared with list.contains is huge. So sometimes we have to think more in terms of outside of lists and other things as to other techniques we can use, because merge is a really, really fast transformation. Because it's doing those joins automatically rather than having to go through and iterate over that list. So that's my 6th tip. That's how we can filter based on a list, but then also do it much faster using a merge, which means obviously it's fine if you want to do an exact match. If you want to do bigger than this and smaller than that and all those other things, it's not going to work. But most people, this is the scenario that they want to filter based on a single list.
Excellent. I'm going to show you a really nice trick here. If we have to transform a particular column, you can just select the column and then go to the transform tab and then do anything, right? So I'm just going to go to the transform tab and perhaps convert everything to a lowercase. So I can click on the transform tab and format, and then I'm going to say lowercase, and this becomes a lowercase. Now, the thing is that if you take a look at the piece of code here, table.transform columns, it has hard-coded the names of the columns. So sales rep, lower, customer, text.lower, right? Now, the trick is that if you happen to not write the column names and just write the function, this is going to apply to the entire table. So you're going to write it something like this. You're going to say that table.transform columns. Which table are you trying to work with? I'm trying to work with this particular table in the previous step. Which columns are you trying to work with? I'm trying to work with all the columns of this particular table. So I can just go in here and I can say, hey, I'm just trying to work with all the columns. How do you write all the columns? Just that, all the columns. And what do you want to do with the columns? So what's the default transformation that you want to apply to every single column? I want to apply text.lower. Now here is where it's going to apply text.lower to all the columns of the table. Now, if you go back to the previous step, there was one more text column in the table, which was the region column. I click on OK and we get the region column. This is also a text. If you move to the next step, although we did not write the region column in the formula, it is going to consider the region column also in the lowercase. So the trick is, if you have to leave this parameter and not write anything, and the function that you write here applies to every single column that is there in the table.
Very nice. I have to say, I didn't know that. I've never tried it. That's a great little tip.
Yeah. Okay, over to you.
Okay, so here is my last tip. This is the one where it's go big or go home. Okay, so I'm going big, which means there's high risk, high reward. Okay. It could go drastically wrong. So I've connected to an Excel workbook that contains 4 worksheets.
Okay.
If I click on each one of these, you'll see we have the data from each of these worksheets. Now, if I combine these columns, what it's going to do is combine based on column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's going to have all of my null columns in there. I then have to filter them out. We all know it's much better to transform each of those tables individually and then combine the clean data together.
That's right.
Now, what any sane person would do would be to create a parameter and then create a custom column. Sorry, I don't mean a custom column, a custom function that you then apply over and over again. But there was something interesting that I learned, which was when you add a column. So, for example, if you go add column, custom column, what this custom column is that while we get used to kind of entering formulas in here, you could create a new query and you could say let, and then you can create other steps inside this let statement.
Okay.
So you could be let, and then you could call it source equals, and then you keep going. You can add steps, and at the end, you might end up with an in statement, and then you return whatever your last step is. So within a custom column, you can insert a whole nother query.
That's right. Okay.
Which means if I can create a query that cleans up my data, I can insert that into a custom column and clean up my data all within one step.
Okay. Okay.
So this is where it could go wrong. I'm going to right click on one of my tables and go to add as new query. So I've got Jan 23 underscore sheet. I've got source and navigation in there already.
Okay.
So the steps I'm going to undertake, let's say I'm happy to remove my null columns. Let's say I know there's no null in the middle of my values. I can remove my null columns. I don't want to remove, I want to not null. Then I can promote my headers. And I've got the default applied, so it's going to change types automatically, but am I happy with that? Yes, I am, it's good enough. Okay.
Cool.
So now I've got a query that cleans up a single table. So if I go to View, Advanced Editor,
right,
in here is all the steps in my query. Now, I don't need the first steps. That's where I connect to the file. That's where I drill down into the sheet. The first thing I did was to filter down to each row. So I'm going to delete those steps. So the first thing I'm doing is filtering down to the row, promoting the headers, and then changing the types. So that piece there is the bit that we need to remember, okay?
Okay.
I'm going to copy this, click Done. Now, I've got two options here. I can either come back to my query and I can add a column, or I can transform an existing column. Let's just go for an add column method.
Okay, okay.
So if I go to add column and then custom column, I'm going to paste in that code. Now we know that this item here referred to the previous step at the time that we undertook that action. But we're doing this on a row by row basis, and all of our tables are in the data column. So I'm going to replace that with the word data and then click OK. And now, oh no, over here in my custom column, here we go.
Yeah, I can.
In my custom column, I now have a clean data set.
Excellent.
Which I can then, let's say, remove those. Actually, let me keep my name and my custom column. I will remove other columns. And then when I expand that, it will then give me a nice clean data set with all of my individual tables combined together.
That's brilliant.
Now, if we want to, we can go, you think, why are we adding columns and taking away columns? Couldn't you just add that query directly into a transform step? Well, why don't we try that?
Sure.
So let's go back to our custom column. Let's get our code. I'm going to copy that. That's a company called data. Let's take a note of that. Now I don't want these other steps here. We're going to do some code stealing now. So I want, if you can't remember syntax, you just change another column and then use that syntax. So I'm going to use first characters and select column 1, so 1 character, click OK. That's not actually what I want to do. I would rename this step in reality because it won't be extract first characters.
Sure.
We're going to undertake this on our data column. We don't want text, it's going to return a table. And then rather than our text.start, we're going to paste in our query. And rather than referring to the data column, we're going to use an underscore to refer to each row in our table.
Right.
All right, this is go big or go home time now. Click OK. Now if I look in my data table, I've got all of those transformed automatically, which means I don't need my added custom step.
Yeah.
So I've done it all in one step without having to remove, I might then remove columns and expand that data. So rather than adding a column, we've done it inside our original column, but there's nothing on the user interface that lets you do a table transform on a table column. You have to take, if you want to steal the syntax, you've got to use it to another column and then repoint it to do the transformation that you actually want to undertake.
This is brilliant. This is brilliant.
So that is my go big or go home moment. So that's my last tip.
Excellent.
So back over to you, Chandeep.
So this is my go big or go home kind of trick. So hang on a second. The trick is actually small, but it's going to solve a lot of good problems. So I'm going to open up the data. All right. So here we have a table, and the table is sorted in the ascending order of the months. So you have Jan, Feb, March, April, so on and so forth. And then you have the employee ID. And it's sorted by the month, it's sorted by the employee ID. Now, if you take a look at the first employee, which is 782, this guy was a zonal manager for the first 2 months, Jan and Feb. And then his role changed to a branch manager. And then for all of these months continuing, he was a branch manager. So if I just scroll down, he was a branch manager, a branch manager, a branch manager, still a branch manager, goes on. And then the 782 guy in the month of September 2020 becomes a team supervisor. And then if you just maybe go down and take a look, he again becomes a branch manager. That means he was already a branch manager prior, but then he again becomes a branch manager. So if you just maybe perhaps count the number of stints that he has, so this is where his stint actually ends, December 2021. So if you just count how many stints has he had in the entire data, you're going to see that this is 1 stint when he was a team supervisor. He was a branch manager all of this while. This is stint number 2. That is stint number 3. Stint number 4, branch manager. And if you just go up on the top, zone manager once again. If you take a look at this, you're going to have 5 stints, but then the role is duplicated. That means he was a branch manager, he switched to something else, and then he again became the branch manager. So if you were to do a unique count or something like that, you're not going to get 5, you're going to get 3. So if I just maybe filter for that first employee, click on OK. If I take a look at the unique roles, these are 3 roles, but still there are 5 stints across those 3 roles. Well, how do we get to a number 5? That's the question. So I am going to load this data into Power Query. So I'll just do that. And I'm right here. Now, I'm going to start to apply grouping to this data, which is in the transform tab. I'll use a group and I'll group by the employee code and the role. So advanced tab, employee code and the role. And all I want to have is all rows, and the operation is going to be all rows. Click on OK, and that's what we get. Now, if you take a look at for the first employee right here, you're going to see that for the first employee, we do not get 5 rows of data. We just get 3 rows of data. So every single time he was a branch manager for all of those months, even if they were different stints, are clubbed into this particular table. How do we get 5 here? The default grouping style in Power Query is global grouping. That means it takes a look at the entire data, everything which is same, it just groups it together. But what's the kind of grouping that I would want? I would want to take a look at something like this. Make a combination of the employee code and the role. Make that 2 columns as a combination and keep checking the next row. Is that same or is that different? As soon as the next row is different than the current row, you make a new group. So this is going to be group 1, this is going to be group 2, and as soon as the rows change again, the current row and the next row, meaning the concatenation of these 2 values, it's going to make a new group. How do I write all of that logic? Well, guess what? You have a very simple option. So in the group rows step that we have done, we've already done the grouping by employee code and the role, which is the concatenation of these 2 columns. All that I would want to do here is that towards the end of the function, I can put in a comma and I can declare a group kind parameter. By default, this is global. I'm going to make it local. Local simply means keep checking the current row and the next row, current row and the next row. As soon as the next row is different than the current row, that's a different group. So how do I write that? I'm just going to say that the group kind is going to be local. That's it. That's literally it. Press enter, and you now get 5 rows for that dude. Now, these are his 5 stints. Now, you can group the data once again by the employee, and once you group the data again by the employee, you're not going to get 3 rows, but you're going to get 5 rows for that. If you want to count the number of stints, you can also do that. So you can just happen to say something like each underscore, this underscore is happening to give you a table. If you want to count how many stints are there, you can just say something like, hey, I want to just do a row count, table.row count. And that's it. Close the bracket, press enter. And that is nothing but the duration of the stint. So here he was there for 2 months, 30 months, 3 months, 10 months, and 3 months again. That is the stint. That was
very nice. Very nice.
That was a trick. Cool. Of course, thank you, Mark, for showing up. People are going to comment and let us know whose tricks did they find better. Or in case you get a point for the trick, you're going to have a point. In case I get a point for my trick, I'm going to have a point. Let's just see how does this end. But it was awesome for you to come over and share amazing tricks in Power Query.
Well, I could have been scared because you are the M code king, but I thought, you know what, I've got something to add. I might be able to pull out some little, some rabbit out of a hat from somewhere that might, that might impress somebody. Who knows?
Yeah, I really like.
So yeah,
I really like the trick, especially when you transform the single column, put the let and the in just one column, and boom, it was done. That was go big and go home.
But ultimately, if I lose, I'm absolutely fine with that. Hopefully. Literally everyone's got like 14 Power Query tricks.
Yes.
Maybe they knew some. They probably didn't know all of them.
Absolutely.
So either way, I'm a happy boy.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Mark, for doing this.